Welcome to today's historical deep dive. He stood astride Europe like a colossus, a self-made emperor who commanded nations and seemed to bend reality to his will. They called him the Little Corporal, the Eagle, the Man of Destiny. His ambition reshaped continents, his genius inspired armies, and his very name became synonymous with power. Yet, history isn't just written in coronation halls or on victorious battlefields. Sometimes, the most profound lessons are etched in ice, written on the faces of starving men, during moments of desperate, agonizing retreat. We study Napoleon not just to marvel at the heights he reached, but to understand the terrible price of believing you are unstoppable. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand on the frozen banks of the Berezina River. November 1812. The air bites raw and deep, stealing breath. Around you, the Grande Armée, once 500,000 strong, is a tattered, starving remnant. Men huddle around dying fires, their faces gaunt, eyes vacant with frostbite and despair. The sound is a low moan of wind, of suffering, of cracking ice. This is not the triumphant march of conquerors. This is the frantic, desperate scramble of broken men trying to escape a vast, indifferent land that has consumed their glory, their comrades, and their emperor's seemingly unstoppable force. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter, the meager fabric offering little defense against the crushing cold. Just months ago, you marched into Russia under banners flying high, believing in the destiny of the emperor who had redrawn the map of Europe. Now, that destiny feels like a cruel joke. The rivers are turning to ice, the bridges are few, and the enemy harries your flanks. Every step is agony, every breath a defiance of the biting wind. The principle that brought you here, the emperor's belief in his own absolute will, his conviction that he could command geography, climate, and nations alike, has shattered on the anvil of reality. This is the moment where the limits of unchecked ambition are brutally revealed, not in a grand battle orchestrated by brilliant tactics, but in the agonizing step-by-step collapse of an empire frozen from the inside out. It's a grim spectacle, watching the greatest military machine of the age dissolve into individual suffering. Napoleon, the architect of victories, is here, amidst the wreckage. His authority, now less potent than a simple wooden bridge, the engineers desperately try to build. The ultimate irony? The man who mastered the chessboard of Europe is being checkmated by the board itself, by the infinite, indifferent white of the Russian winter. Ask yourself, standing knee-deep in this frozen despair, witnessing the emperor's grand vision crumble into this horrific tableau, was the march into Russia a bold gamble for ultimate triumph? Paris, October 1795. The city is a tinderbox, primed to explode. Royalist rebels swarm the streets, their shouts a direct challenge to the National Convention, the fragile heart of the French Revolution. Inside the hall, panic reigns. Politicians wring their hands, debate furiously, frozen by indecision as the threat mounts. A power vacuum is opening up, vast and terrifying, inviting chaos to swallow everything the revolution has built. But you are there. Not yet the emperor, or even the celebrated general, but a young, ambitious Corsican officer, barely 26. You stand apart. French by decree, but an outsider in spirit. Your accent marking you, a simmering resentment for the Parisian elite, a constant companion. You watch the fear in the eyes of the established figures, the paralysis of principle and doubt. Your mind, however, is a different landscape. Sharp, cold, utterly ruthless. You see not an ideological battle, but an opportunity. The rebels advance, a human tide threatening to break against the convention's weak defenses. There's no time for grand strategy, only brutal necessity. You are given command. You move with decisive speed. You order artillery brought up, cannons wheeled into position on the narrow streets surrounding the Tuileries. This is your language, the geometry of force, the raw power of iron. While others falter, you calculate the angles, the impact. Then the order. Not a speech, just two words that echo like destiny. Fire. A whiff of grape shot tears through the air. A terrible sound, iron balls ripping through flesh and bone. Brutal, decisive, terrifyingly effective. The mob breaks, scatters. Their rebellion crushed in a single bloody Shingen. The streets run red, but the convention is saved. This wasn't a victory won by inspiring ideals. It was a victory forged in cold, calculated force. It was the moment you understood that power in times of crisis doesn't belong to the most principled or the most popular, but to the one willing to act decisively, to fill the vacuum with unhesitating strength, even if it means making choices others recoil from. You, the Corsican outsider, have just carved your name into the bedrock of French power with artillery smoke and spilled blood. It's a stark, unforgiving lesson. Survival and advancement often depend less on noble intentions and more on the brutal clarity to do what is necessary when others are paralyzed by doubt. Ask yourself, faced with that surging tide of rebellion, would you have had the iron will to give that order? The mud of Italy clings to your boots, thick and demoralizing. You arrive in 1796 to find an army in tatters, ill-equipped, starving, and outnumbered by the seasoned Austrian forces. Doubt hangs heavy in the air. Who is this scrawny Corsican nobody? But you don't see despair. You see an opportunity, a chessboard where convention can be shattered. You unleash a new kind of warfare. Instead of cautious maneuvers and sieges, you move like lightning, forcing marches day and night. Your troops, initially grumbling, are astonished as you ignore textbook strategy, concentrating forces where least expected, striking with brutal speed. Victory follows victory. Lodi, where you personally lead the charge across a bullet-swept bridge, transforming skepticism into awe. Castiglione, a masterclass in central position and rapid concentration. Arcole, where you again expose yourself to danger, earning a wound but solidifying your image as a leader who shares their fate. You eat their coarse rations, sleep on the ground among them, call them by name. You speak their language, not just French, but the language of glory, of plunder, of shared hardship, and unimaginable triumph. They stop seeing a distant general and start seeing one of their own, but touched by destiny. You deliver not just safety, but riches and pride, something the Republic's bureaucracy had failed utterly to provide. They begin to adore you, this impossible whirlwind of a man who defies logic and wins against all odds. He is no longer just Bonaparte. He is the petit caporal, their champion, their miracle worker. This period is a furnace forging something new, the intoxicating power of momentum and the terrifying force of a cult of personality. You discover that success is the ultimate intoxicant, breeding fierce loyalty faster than any ideology. Audacity, not caution, inspires men to superhuman feats. As victory piles upon victory, a dangerous myth takes root, that you are invincible. Your soldiers whisper it, the enemy fears it, and subtly, insidiously, you begin to believe it too. This is the profound, double-edged lesson of Italy. Early, dramatic successes are the most potent tool for building an aura of invincibility, a magnetic force that inspires followers to sacrifice everything. But it's also a poison chalice. If the leader internalizes this myth, forgetting the role of luck, the exhaustion of men, the shifting tides of external factors, or the simple limits of reality, that aura of invincibility transforms into blind hubris. Ask yourself, was this string of improbable victories pure strategic genius, or the gambler's streak that paid off spectacularly? And what happens when the gambler begins to believe the dice are charmed rather than just lucky? The legend is born, yes, but so too are the seeds of the eventual, inevitable downfall. You step onto the dusty shore of Egypt. The air is thick with the scent of the desert, the promise of the ancient East. It is 1798, and your ambition, forged in the crucible of Europe, now leaps continents. Your mind isn't just on conquering this land. It envisions a grander prize, disrupting the lifeblood of the British Empire by cutting off its route to India. You dream of connecting France to the riches and influence of the Orient. A modern Alexander the Great, linking West and East under your banner. You march inland, the sun beating down, your army pushing towards the legendary pyramids. There, under the gaze of structures that have stood for 40 centuries, you face the Mamluks. The moment is steeped in history, pregnant with destiny. You rally your troops, pointing to the colossal stone guardians. Soldiers, 40 centuries are looking down upon you. It is a stroke of rhetorical genius, linking your campaign to the grandeur of the ages, inspiring awe and purpose. You win the Battle of the Pyramids, a tactical victory on land, seemingly validating the audacity of your venture. But leadership isn't just about inspiring rhetoric or winning battles on your chosen terrain. It's about understanding the fundamental forces that govern the world. Your grand vision, unanchored by practical realities, was already doomed by an inconvenient truth. Britain ruled the waves. While you were winning battles under the ancient sun, the British Navy, under the relentless Horatio Nelson, hunted your fleet. The blow falls swift and devastating. At the Battle of the Nile in Aboukir Bay, Nelson annihilates the French fleet. Every ship of the line, save 2, is destroyed or captured. Suddenly your army, the instrument of your grand Eastern dream, is stranded. The sea, which should have been your lifeline to France, becomes an impassable barrier. You are trapped in a land that, despite your initial victory, begins to resist fiercely. Logistics, stretched thin across hostile terrain, collapse. Disease, a silent, indiscriminate enemy, ravages your ranks. Here lies the chilling irony. Your most visually magnificent campaign, fought under the world's oldest monuments, founders not on the sands of Egypt, but on the waves of the Mediterranean, a realm you fundamentally failed to control or appreciate the decisive power of. Your vision was vast, yes, but it lacked a grounded assessment of obstacles, particularly the most critical one: British naval supremacy. You grasp the inescapable truth. This expedition is doomed. The strategic objective, India, is unreachable. The army is isolated and wasting away. Always pragmatic, always calculating, you make the difficult, perhaps ruthless, decision. Leaving your army under the command of capable generals, you slip back to France, navigating the dangerous waters in a frigate, abandoning the sands of Egypt to pursue opportunities rising from the political turmoil back home. Ask yourself, was this initial brilliance in vision or ultimate hubris in execution? What does it mean when the grandest plans are undone by the most basic practicalities, like who controls the sea lanes? This chapter in your journey offers a stark, timeless lesson. Ignoring inconvenient truths, especially those beyond your immediate domain of expertise or control, leads inevitably to failure. No matter how inspiring your rhetoric or how ancient the gaze upon your soldiers, vision without a grounded understanding of logistical, environmental. Back in Paris, late 1799, the air crackles with discontent, a storm brewing in the heart of France. The Directory, the government born of the revolution's chaos, is rotten, corrupt, inefficient, despised. It offers no stability, only a vacuum of power waiting to be filled. You, fresh from the ambiguous glories of Egypt, see it. Your ambition, ever a hungry wolf, scents opportunity. This is not the battlefield, not the clear lines of march and maneuver you mastered in Italy. This is the murky, treacherous world of Parisian politics, a viper's nest where influence is bought and sold, and loyalty is a fragile thing. Yet, you decide to strike. The plan? A coup d'état on 18th Brumaire of the year 8, November 9th, 1799. The goal: dismantle the Directory and seize control, ostensibly to save the Republic. But the execution? It is anything but the swift, decisive action history often remembers you for. It is a fumbling, awkward mess. You secure the support of key figures, military and political, but the plan unravels almost immediately upon contact with reality. When you address the Council of Ancients, it goes smoothly enough. But when you confront the Council of 500 at St. Cloud, it turns into a debacle. You step into the ornate hall, expecting deference, perhaps swift passage of your decree. Instead, you are met with shouts, jeers, accusations of being a dictator, a tyrant. Deputies surge towards you, jostling, shouting, "Outlaw him! Down with the tyrant!" The scene is chaotic, terrifying. You, the man who calmly faced cannon fire, who coolly directed armies, falter. Words catch in your throat. You stammer, your famous composure dissolving under the raw, personal hostility. This is not the respectful awe of soldiers. It is the furious, spitting rage of cornered politicians. You are visibly shaken, perhaps even close to collapse. It is a moment of stark, uncomfortable truth. The legendary willpower seems to falter when faced not with abstract strategy or distant enemies, but with direct, personal confrontation in a political arena. The coup nearly fails because you, the mastermind, falter at the crucial political confrontation. It is your brother, Napoleon Bonaparte, president of the Council of 500, who saves the day. Thinking fast, he declares the opposing deputies are in league with assassins and appeals to the soldiers guarding the hall. Then, the loyal grenadiers, led by figures like Murat, physically extract you, half fainting, from the hostile chamber, and march in to disperse the deputies by force of bayonet. It's a far cry from the neat whiff of grape shot that defended the convention years earlier. This is raw power, clumsily applied, rescuing a political failure. You emerge from this chaotic scramble as first consul of France, technically part of a triumvirate, but the undeniable man in charge. Yet the path to power wasn't paved with glory. It was littered with fumbled speeches, near panics, and the brute force of soldiers called in to finish a job the schemers couldn't. Ask yourself, what does this messy grab for power, this moment of personal weakness amid ruthless ambition, tell you about the true nature of seizing absolute control? Was this the mark of a decisive leader, or simply a ruthless opportunist willing to stumble his way to the top and use whatever tools, even his brother and loyal guards, were necessary to clean up his own mess? This wasn't a coronation. It was a street fight in fancy dress, and you very nearly lost. You sit at the heavy oak desk, bathed in the glow of a dozen candles. Outside, Paris sleeps uneasily. The revolution's fever finally broken, but the body politic still weak, fragmented, bleeding from a decade of upheaval. You, Napoleon Bonaparte, first consul, are no longer just the storming general. You are the chief architect, the tireless builder. Your immense, almost terrifying energy has pivoted from the battlefield to the bureaucratic. The fight now is against chaos itself, and the weapons are decrees, ledgers, and the relentless stroke of the pen. He understands, with a clarity few military leaders ever grasp, that a state isn't built on victories alone, but on foundations laid stone by painstaking stone. The France you inherited is fractured, finances in ruins, infrastructure crumbling, the powerful Catholic Church alienated, laws a tangled mess of regional traditions. You attack this administrative front with the same ferocity you showed at Lodi or Austerlitz. Central government is consolidated, stripping away the vestiges of revolutionary localism and royalist fragmentation. The economy, a patient bleeding out, receives a transfusion with the creation of the Bank of France in 1800, a masterstroke of financial engineering designed to stabilize currency and fund your future ambitions. Roads, canals, ports, the sinews of a modern state, are planned and built with startling efficiency. Perhaps the most surprising move, given the revolution's anti-clerical fervor, is the Concordat of 1801 with Pope Pius VII. It brings the Church back, recognizing Catholicism as the religion of the majority of Frenchmen, not the state religion. It's a pragmatic concession, a cynical peace treaty with a powerful social force, using religion to restore social order and your own legitimacy, buying you a measure of control over episcopal appointments. This isn't piety, it's power consolidation, cloaked in reconciliation. And then, the magnum opus of this period, the Civil Code. Commissioned in 1800, enacted in 1804, it is a revolutionary document wrapped in authoritarian paper. It codifies law across France, replacing the old patchwork. It enshrines principles like equality before the law, for men at least, secularism of the state, and freedom of religion, key revolutionary ideals. Yet, it also reinforces patriarchal authority within the family and protects property rights fiercely, creating a legal framework that is clear, consistent, and enforceable by your centralized state. You actively participate in the council debates on the code, poring over details, demonstrating an astonishing grasp of legal principles alongside your administrative drive. This period, 1800 to 1804, is arguably the peak of your constructive genius. It's less glamorous than the campaigns, but infinitely more lasting. The administrative and legal structures you forge here will outlive your empire, shaping France and influencing legal systems across Europe and beyond for centuries. You are not just a conqueror. You are a bureaucrat king, a legislator dictator. The irony? You are laying the bedrock for a state whose strength will enable your future wars, the very wars that will ultimately consume you. Ask yourself, when does brilliant administration become the infrastructure for tyranny? What level of order is worth the concentration of such immense power? This study, late at night, is where the true foundations of your enduring, complex legacy are poured. The air in Paris grows thick with suspicion. Your ascent, once hailed as salvation, now feels increasingly precarious from within the gilded cage of power. Whispers of Bourbon restoration, of assassinations, slither through the salons and back alleys. Royalist plots, some real, some perhaps magnified by your own mounting anxiety, paint shadows on every wall. Georges Cadoudal, a name spat with venom in your inner circle, is uncovered in a conspiracy aimed directly at your life. The net tightens. And in the tightening, paranoia finds a target. The Duke of Enghien, a young Bourbon prince living just across the border in neutral Baden. Is he linked to these plots? Is he a rallying point for enemies? Or is he simply a name, a symbol that the mounting pressure demands be extinguished? You make the chilling calculation. Sovereignty, international law, the rights of a neutral state, these become secondary considerations in the grim calculus of securing your own throne. Your own life. You issue the order. Seize the Duke. French dragoons cross the border into Ettenheim in the dead of night, snatching Enghien from his bed, dragging him across France to the Château de Vincennes. The trial is a travesty of justice, hurried, secret, before a military commission already instructed on the desired outcome. The charges flimsy, the evidence non-existent by any legal standard. He is condemned, and then, the moat at Vincennes, pre-dawn darkness of March 21st, 1804. The scene is stark, brutal. You are not there, but the execution is done on your command. The Duke stands, refuses a blindfold, holds a medallion of his wife, and faces the firing squad in the cold moat ditch. The shots ring out, an irreversible act echoing across the silent fortress walls, across Europe. This single act is a thunderclap. It is not just a killing, it is a declaration. You are willing to violate any law, any norm to crush perceived threats. It sends a shockwave through the courts of Europe, solidifying alliances against you, stripping away the veneer of legality that your new regime desperately needed. Internally, it horrifies many who had supported you as a bringer of order, a restorer of law, revealing the chilling face of absolute power unchecked. Ask yourself, was this decisive security or self-inflicted isolation? What happens when the leader becomes the state and dissent is reclassified as treason? The lesson etched into the stone walls of Vincennes is stark. The pursuit of security, when allowed to override justice, principle, and law, inevitably breeds tyranny. You gain absolute control in the moment, perhaps, but at the cost of legitimacy, alienating those who believed in a just system, leaving you ever more reliant on force alone. The moat of Vincennes is more than a grave. It is the moat you begin to dig around yourself. December 2nd, 1804, Notre Dame Cathedral. The air is thick with incense and anticipation, a tableau of European power assembled under the ancient arches. You stand before Pope Pius VII, invited from Rome, the first pontiff to travel this far for a coronation in centuries. This is the culmination of your impossible climb. From a rough-edged Corsican outsider, speaking French with an accent, to master of France, ruler of an empire carved from victory. All eyes are on you. The crown, shimmering with jewels, rests on the altar. It is the moment steeped in tradition, signifying authority granted by God, mediated by the Church. But you did not come this far by divine right or inherited lineage. You came by cannon fire, by relentless will, by bending nations and men to your purpose. In a gesture that seizes the narrative, that defines your absolute belief in self-made destiny, you reach out not for the waiting cushion, but for the crown itself. You lift it, not allowing the Pope to touch it, and place it deliberately, firmly upon your own head. A silent gasp ripples through the nave. This act, so simple yet so revolutionary, declares that your power originates not from God or ancient bloodlines, but from your own hand, your own achievements, your own formidable will. You are emperor by the grace of Napoleon. Then you turn and crown your empress, Josephine, binding her fate to yours, solidifying the dynastic dream. This scene is heavy with immense symbolic weight. It is a public declaration of a profound psychological shift. You are no longer merely the first consul, the first among equals, the savior of the republic. You are an undisputed dynastic ruler. You are no longer just the head of state. In your mind, you are the state, embodying its power, its future, its very essence. The principle revealed is stark. Ambition, once it reaches the pinnacle, often transforms into an insatiable need for absolute legitimacy, even if that legitimacy must be self-granted, wrested from the hands of tradition and divine authority. Here lies the tragic irony. By seizing the symbols of ancient monarchy, you solidify your power, yes, but you also begin to adopt its trappings, its mindset. The takeaway burns bright. Reaching the absolute pinnacle can, paradoxically, blind you to the foundations you stood upon. Ceding to the illusion of divine right, even when self-bestowed with such defiant flair, subtly means you no longer feel truly accountable to the very people, the very principles of the revolution, the very soldiers whose loyalty and blood enabled your phenomenal rise. Ask yourself, was this a stroke of defiant genius, cementing a new form of authority? Or was it the first, subtle step onto a path that would ultimately isolate you, leading you to believe your will alone was sufficient to command the world, forgetting the consent of the governed and the limits of even the most extraordinary ambition? What would you have done, standing there, the weight of the world resting on the decision of whose hand would place that crown? It's December 2nd, 1805. The mist hangs heavy over Austerlitz, thick and cold. You stand on the Pratzen Heights, a natural fortress you've intentionally surrendered, a piece in a game only you truly understand. Below, the combined might of Russia and Austria, the Third Coalition's challenge, masses its strength. They outnumber you, perhaps 85,000 to your 72,000. But numbers mean little when genius dictates the board. This day is no accident. It is the anniversary of your coronation, a date chosen to perhaps bless this undertaking, or perhaps simply to prove that your destiny unfolds exactly when and where you command it. You have lured them masterfully into a trap. You feigned weakness on your right flank, pulling their reserves down into the low ground towards the frozen Sachin and Menets lakes. The Allied generals, bloated with confidence, swallow the bait whole. They see an easy breakthrough, a chance to roll up your flank and isolate Vienna. What they don't see is the hammer poised to fall. The air is tense, alive with the unspoken anticipation of thousands. Then, as your forces execute the pivotal ascent onto the now weakened Pratzen Heights, reclaiming the high ground in a stunning, perfectly timed maneuver, something happens. The sun, previously hidden by the dense mist, breaks through. A shaft of blinding light pierces the gloom, illuminating your advancing troops, casting long shadows that seem to stretch all the way back to Paris. This is the sun of Austerlitz. It is more than just weather. It feels like a divine spotlight, a cosmic affirmation of your strategic brilliance. The Allied center, left exposed and vulnerable after stripping their line to reinforce the misguided attack on your right, crumbles under the sudden, ferocious assault. Your army splits their forces in two, driving a wedge between the Russians and the Austrians. Those who attempted to cross the frozen lakes find themselves under devastating artillery fire. The ice cracks. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, plunge into the frigid water. A chilling, terrible end beneath the sun of glory. This is not just a victory. It is a masterpiece. It is a symphony of timing, deception, and audacious movement played out on the grandest stage. Your casualties are minimal compared to the enemy's catastrophic losses. Emperor Francis I of Austria will seek an armistice. Tsar Alexander I of Russia will retreat in disarray. Europe is stunned. Your reputation, already formidable, is now untouchable. You are not just a general. You are the general, the preeminent military mind of the era. But look closer at that blinding sun. Does it illuminate the path forward, or does its glare start to hide the pitfalls? This flawless victory, this perfect execution, solidifies something dangerous within you: the absolute conviction of your own infallibility. Austerlitz isn't just a battle won. It's the moment the intoxicating power of unchallenged success takes root. You proved you could command armies with unparalleled skill, orchestrate events on a vast scale. The next logical step, the whisper in the victorious wind, is the thought that perhaps you can command not just armies, but fate itself. Ask yourself, when you stand bathed in the light of such absolute triumph, when every decision has been proven correct, every gamble paid off spectacularly, how do you hear the quiet voice of caution? How do you recognize limits when you've just proven you can seemingly overcome any? The sun of Austerlitz is brilliant, yes, but like staring directly into the sun, prolonged exposure can leave you blind to the subtle shifts, the growing resentments, the potential for miscalculation that brilliant success can paradoxically breed. This moment of peak glory plants the seeds of the belief that future failures are simply impossible. The ink dries on the decree, crisp on the heavy paper. You are miles from any harbor, seated at a polished desk in a palatial room. Yet with this quill, you attempt to redraw the lines of global trade. Europe, for the most part, kneels before you. Armies have been defeated, empires dissolved, borders redrawn by the thrust of your sword and the brilliance of your strategy. But there remains an island across a narrow stretch of water, their sails darkening every major ocean. Their wealth built on commerce, Great Britain. An invasion is impossible. Their navy is an impenetrable shield. So you devise another weapon, the continental system, launched in 1806. This is not a campaign of cannon fire and cavalry charges. This is an economic war, waged not with soldiers, but with paper and penalties. By imperial decree, you forbid your vast empire and every allied nation from trading with Britain. No British goods are to cross the borders of your dominion. No ships from your ports are to dock in British harbors. You intend to choke the lifeblood of their economy, to watch their factories falter and their treasury dwindle. Ports across the continent, from Hamburg to Naples, become silent, sealed against the British flood. Ships are seized, cargoes are confiscated. The flow of centuries-old trade routes is ordered to halt. It is a grand, audacious gamble, an attempt to command the very currents of global capitalism, not with the forces of supply and demand, but with the brute force of imperial will. You sit here, signing papers, orchestrating an unseen conflict. This feels, perhaps, like another strategic masterpiece, a checkmate on the board of nations. But this battleground is fundamentally different. You have mastered the logistics of armies, the morale of soldiers, the geometry of the battlefield. Now, you try to master the chaotic, organic dance of markets, the deep-seated needs of merchants, the simple desire of a consumer for goods from abroad. You command allegiance, but can you command hunger for tea or the need for textiles? You can close a port, but can you stop a smuggler's boat in the dead of night, guided by moonlight and greed? This is the subtle, dangerous shift, believing that because you can command armies, you can command economies, that because you can dictate political terms, you can dictate human behavior and market forces. You confuse political control with economic reality, the power of decree with the power of necessity. The system is a sieve from the start. Merchants go bankrupt. Essential goods become scarce or prohibitively expensive. Resentment simmers. Your allies, forced into economic hardship for your strategic goal, chafe under the restrictions. They signed treaties of alliance, not economic suicide pacts. Their populations grumble. You find yourself not just fighting Britain, but fighting the very nature of commerce, the inherent human drive to buy and sell, to connect through trade regardless of political boundaries. Ask yourself, was this the move of a strategic genius or the ultimate expression of hubris, believing the world itself bends to your will? What would you have done standing in his boots, faced with an unconquerable naval rival? The decrees signed in a silent palace send ripples of hardship and defiance across a continent, proving that even absolute power finds its limits when confronting the intricate, indomitable forces of economics and human nature. You learn, slowly and painfully, that you can conquer kingdoms, but you cannot conquer commerce. You stand at the cusp of 1808, Europe largely bowing before your will. The continental system, designed to strangle Britain, requires every port closed, every coast loyal. Spain, despite its Bourbon king, remains a weak link, its adherence questionable. You see an opportunity, not just to tighten the blockade, but to redraw another border, to place another Bonaparte crown on a willing head. Your brother Joseph, currently ruling Naples, seems a fitting choice for the ancient throne of Spain. You envision a swift, decisive intervention. Depose the weak monarch, install your brother, ensure Spain falls neatly into the vast puzzle of your empire. You march your legions across the Pyrenees, confident. This is what you do best. Dismantle old regimes, install new ones, assert your authority. You expect the capitulation of armies, perhaps a brief skirmish, followed by the administrative work of installing a new court and government. But the dust of Spain holds a different kind of enemy, one not found on the flat plains of Central Europe. As you depose Ferdinand VII and Charles IV and proclaim Joseph king, a tremor runs through the Spanish soul. This is not merely a change of dynasty. It feels like a foreign hand reaching for their very identity, their deeply rooted faith, their ancient pride. What you unleash is not a conventional war, but something primal, ferocious. The Spanish people, fragmented by geography and history, find a sudden, fierce unity in resistance. They don't meet your armies in grand battles. They melt into the rugged landscape, striking from ambush. Priests become guerrilla leaders. Peasants turn muskets against your seasoned veterans. This is guerrilla warfare, the Little War, a term born from this very conflict, defining a brutal, irregular struggle against an occupying force. Imagine the scene. A dusty Spanish village, midday sun beating down. Your soldiers patrol the narrow streets, their boots echoing ominously. Windows are shuttered, doors barred. The air is thick with tension, heavy with the scent of olive groves and unspoken hatred. Suddenly, a shot rings out from a rooftop. A soldier falls. Your men turn, firing wildly at empty windows. By the time they storm the building, the sniper is gone, vanished into the maze of alleys, swallowed by the unforgiving hills that surround the village. This is your daily reality in Spain, a constant, draining attrition against an enemy you can rarely see, much less corner or defeat in open combat. This isn't glorious conquest, it's a slow bleed. The Spanish ulcer, as you come to call it, begins to consume your strength. Hundreds of thousands of your best troops, veterans of Austerlitz and Jena, are tied down in this savage, no-holes-barred conflict. Your treasury empties not for decisive campaigns, but for endless patrols, garrison duties, and futile chases. You can win every battle against any Spanish army that dares to form, but you cannot win against a nation that refuses to surrender its spirit. Your brilliance in grand strategy, your mastery of large-scale maneuvers, is useless against an enemy that refuses to stand and fight on your terms. They dictate the terms, the place, the moment, always unexpected, always lethal. The profound insight here, one you perhaps grasped too late, is that national identity and popular will are potent forces that cannot be crushed by conventional military power alone. Your belief in your right to redraw borders and place kings is met not with political negotiation or military capitulation, but with a fierce, unyielding resistance rooted in culture, faith, and the simple, stubborn desire for independence. What would you have done faced with a foe defined not by armies, but by the collective will of a people? The takeaway becomes brutally clear. Arrogance towards the spirit of a nation, the belief that you can simply impose your will on a populace through force, is a recipe for endless, draining conflict that erodes the very foundations of your power, a self-inflicted wound that will bleed for years to come. The Spanish ulcer is a stark reminder that some wars are not fought for land or treasure, but for the intangible yet unbreakable soul of a people. December 1809. The air in the Tuileries Palace is thick with unspoken grief, heavy as the winter fog pressing against the windows. You stand before the assembled court, your generals, your family, Josephine by your side. Your voice, usually a command that could shake continents, is low, strained. You read from the prepared statement. This is not a declaration of war, not an order for a grand maneuver, but a decree of personal devastation disguised as political necessity. You are divorcing Empress Josephine. The reasons are clinical, brutal in their simplicity. She cannot give you an heir. No son to inherit the empire you have forged from chaos and blood. No dynasty to solidify the impossible ascent from Corsican outsider to master of Europe. Look at her now, the woman who was with you in the lean times, who shared your tent fires in Italy, whose name you whispered in the sands of Egypt. Tears stream down her face, the sobs muffled, but the pain is palpable. A jarring note in the otherwise stoic silence of the room. This moment reveals a chilling truth. The architect of modern Europe, the man who rearranged kingdoms with a flick of the pen, cannot escape the ancient biological imperative of lineage that governs the very monarchies he seeks to legitimize himself amongst. This isn't just a marital split, it's a state function. You have built an empire, but without a legitimate heir, it feels like a house built on sand. The old powers of Europe, the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Romanovs, they understand lineage, bloodlines stretching back centuries. Your legitimacy, born of revolution and conquest, feels provisional, a temporary interruption in the grand tapestries of their histories. To secure your place, you need not just a throne, but a cradle. The search for a new empress begins, a purely transactional negotiation on the grandest scale. It's not about love or even affection. It's about blood, womb, and political leverage. You consider a Russian Grand Duchess, but the Tsar hesitates, perhaps wary of your growing power. Then Austria offers Archduchess Marie-Louise, daughter of Emperor Francis I, a direct link to the venerable, ancient House of Habsburg. The irony is almost unbearable. You, the revolutionary who humbled the Holy Roman Empire, are marrying into its most powerful surviving dynasty. It's like the eagle marrying the phoenix, a calculated fusion of the new order with the old. The wedding in April 1810 is a spectacle of imperial grandeur, a deliberate contrast to the raw emotion of the divorce. Marie-Louise arrives, a young woman raised in the rigid etiquette of Vienna, terrified and perhaps a little bewildered by this whirlwind of a man who is now her husband and master of half the continent. She is polite, dutiful, seemingly pliant, but there is none of the easy intimacy, the shared history, the deep, complex bond you had with Josephine. Your relationship with Marie-Louise is respectful, fertile, and functional. You have married a symbol, a diplomatic treaty in human form, a vessel for your dynastic hopes. Within a year, the goal is achieved. In March 1811, Marie-Louise gives birth to a son, Napoleon II, instantly granted the title King of Rome. The bells peal across the empire. The cannons fire. You have your heir. Your dynasty seems secured. The old world acknowledges you, albeit grudgingly, through this union. You hold the child, the tangible proof of your success, the key to permanence. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, a subtle sense of loss lingers. You gained a royal connection and an heir, but you sacrificed the one genuine personal connection that seemed to transcend the relentless calculations of power. Josephine, banished from court, still holds a piece of your heart, a ghost in the imperial halls. This cold, decisive break wasn't merely a political move. It was a moment where the emperor fully subsumed the man. Personal loyalty, shared history, affection, they became liabilities, sentimental obstacles in the path of absolute power and dynastic ambition. The principle is laid bare that the pinnacle of authority, human relationships, are often just another variable in the strategic equation, measured for their utility in securing power and legacy. What would you have done, standing in his boots, faced with the perceived fragility of an empire without an heir? The takeaway here is chilling. The relentless pursuit of permanence, of a legacy etched in stone, can demand sacrifices that strip away your own humanity, leaving you isolated even when surrounded by the trappings of ultimate success. You have the King of Rome, but you may have lost the man who fought for him. Europe, seemingly a chessboard where your hand moved pieces with effortless mastery, now held but one grand defiant square: Russia. It is 1811. From the sun-drenched coasts of Spain to the chilly shores of the Baltic, crowns bend to your will, treaties bear your signature, and the continental system, your grand economic weapon against England, strangles ports and economies across the land. Yet, in the sprawling, inscrutable East, Tsar Alexander I chafes. He opens his ports, he defies your blockade, and in your eyes, he represents the final, unacceptable crack in the edifice of your dominance. You look east, and the ambition that carried you from Corsican obscurity to the imperial throne burns hotter than ever. Complete control, unquestioned authority over the continent. Russia stands in the way, vast and seemingly impervious. The solution, you decide, is simple, terrifying in its scale: force, overwhelming, undeniable force. Orders ripple outwards from Paris, across an empire and its vassal states, unprecedented in scope. From Germany, Italy, Poland, even Austria and Prussia, men are called, resources levied, smiths hammer cannons, quartermasters hoard supplies, generals pore over maps of terrain they barely comprehend. The goal: assemble the largest army Europe has ever witnessed. By 1812, it is a reality. The Grande Armée of 1812. Over 600,000 souls, a kaleidoscope of uniforms, languages, and banners converging on the Russian frontier. A human tide stretching for miles, a sight designed to awe the world and terrify a czar into submission. The sheer scale is breathtaking, a testament to your organizational genius and the unparalleled power you now command. Imagine the scene: endless columns marching, the rumble of thousands of artillery pieces, the glint of bayonets stretching to the horizon, a literal manifestation of your will, seemingly capable of crushing any obstacle through sheer weight. Yet, as this colossal force gathers, whispers turn to warnings. Veterans of Eastern campaigns speak of impossible distances, of roads that turn to mud and then to impassable ice. Logisticians point to the nightmare of supplying over 500,000 men and their horses in a sparsely populated land that practices scorched earth tactics. Diplomats caution that Alexander is not like the pliable monarchs you've faced before. His resolve is iron. Even your closest marshals express unease, their voices hushed, perhaps intimidated by the very scale of the undertaking. You hear them, you acknowledge them, and you dismiss them. The architect of Austerlitz, Jena, and Wagram has faced impossible odds before and bent reality to his will. Your confidence, forged in years of unbroken victory, is absolute. It isn't arrogance, you tell yourself. It's belief in genius, belief in the power of the Grande Armée, belief that no nation, not even Russia, can withstand such a hammer blow. A single, decisive battle, you are certain, will shatter Alexander's will and force him to sue for peace on your terms. This expedition isn't a war of conquest, you rationalize, but a grand demonstration, a short, sharp shock to bring Russia back into line. Here lies the terrifying insight, the combination of immense, unparalleled power and profound, blinding overconfidence. You stand at the peak of your power, and from this height, dissenting voices sound like distant static. The ground truth, the reality of Russian geography, climate, and national spirit, appears as a minor inconvenience, easily overcome by your strategic brilliance and the sheer mass of your army. You are so accustomed to overcoming obstacles with force that you genuinely believe you can conquer distance, weather, and a determined nation's refusal to surrender on your terms. This is the principle in stark, brutal action. The greatest risks are often taken not from a position of weakness, scrambling desperately, but from a peak of perceived invincibility. At the summit of success, dissenting voices are silenced, not necessarily by decree, but because who would dare question the man who has never been wrong? The leader becomes a prisoner of their own triumphant narrative, walled in by yes-men and the echoes of past glories. The takeaway screams across the centuries. The more power you accumulate, the more critical and paradoxically, the more difficult it becomes to actively seek out dissenting opinions and ground truth. Your own conviction, so vital for leadership in times of uncertainty, becomes the greatest blinding force, capable of turning a strategic mind into a stubborn, inflexible instrument of its own destruction. Ask yourself, when you stand at your personal or professional peak, are you listening? Or is your own success whispering reassurances so loudly you can hear nothing else? What would you have done, standing before that endless sea of soldiers on the border, the sun glinting off their bayonets, the whole world seemingly at your feet? Could you have heard the warnings over the roar of your own confidence? June 1812. You stand on the edge of the Niemen River, a vast natural frontier. Before you lies Russia. Behind you, the Grand Army, a mosaic of nations numbering over 500,000 souls, the largest force Europe has ever seen. You give the order, and the crossing begins. It's a logistical miracle of pontoons and sheer manpower, a display of organizational power that rivals any ancient empire. But even as the first soldiers splash through the cold current, a shadow falls over the undertaking, the sheer, unyielding scale of what you are attempting. From day one, the supply lines are a monstrous, hungry serpent, stretching thin across the flatlands. Wagons break, horses die, provisions dwindle faster than expected. You anticipated battle, the glorious, decisive engagement that had won you every campaign before this. You wanted the Russian army to stand and fight, to be broken and scattered in a single brilliant stroke. But Barclay de Tolly and Bagration refuse your invitation. They retreat. They melt away into the endless horizon, pulling you deeper into their land. Then comes the scorched earth. Villages are emptied and burned. Fields are laid waste. They leave you nothing but ash, distance, and the crushing weight of your own numbers. Your grand army, built and honed for the swift, brutal clash of muskets and bayonets, finds itself marching through a void. The early summer sun is a relentless hammer, turning the dusty roads into choked trails. The later autumn rains transform them into soul-draining quagmires. The enemy isn't just the soldiers you cannot find. It's the heat, the mud, the dysentery, the gnawing hunger, the sheer, mind-bending distance. This is the insidious truth. Your army, the instrument of your will, begins to fragment not from combat, but from the journey itself. Logistics fail. Men sicken and die in their thousands before seeing a single Russian regular. Desertion bleeds away your strength. You push deeper and deeper, your gaze fixed on Moscow, chasing the phantom of the victory you so desperately crave, believing that taking the capital will force the Tsar's hand. It's a relentless, almost blind pursuit, fueled by the conviction that your will, your army, must prevail against any obstacle. Here is the chilling insight. You are not fighting the Russian army. You are fighting Russia itself. Its vastness, its unforgiving nature, its people's willingness to endure devastation over subjugation. Your military genius, perfected in the dense landscapes and rapid campaigns of Western Europe, is here a gilded cage. The principles that brought you victory after victory, speed, concentration of force, forcing a decisive battle, are worse than useless. They are actively destructive in this context. Ask yourself, was this perseverance or stubbornness? The core decision was not just to invade, but to pursue indefinitely when the anticipated swift victory failed to materialize. The surprising detail is how quickly the army succumbed to non-combat factors. This reveals the tragic irony. The same scale that made your army look invincible on paper made it impossibly fragile when stretched across this continent-sized trap. The deeper insight is the failure to adapt. You fought the map, not the enemy that understood it perfectly. True strategic genius, history whispers, isn't just knowing how to win on your terms, but having the humility to understand their terms and changing yours when necessary. Your arrogance, your absolute certainty in your methods, turn the infinite horizon into your undoing. September 1812. The smoke chokes the air, thick and acrid. You have finally reached Moscow, the sacred heart of Russia, after the bloody, indecisive maelstrom of Berezina. You expected trumpets, maybe even defiant faces, but certainly a delegation, terms of surrender from a czar whose capital lay exposed. Instead, you find an eerie silence, a city largely deserted, and soon a horizon consumed by fire. He walks through the burning streets, the city becoming its own funeral pyre. You reside in the Kremlin, the historic seat of Russian power, yet power feels utterly absent here. You gaze out from these ancient walls at the inferno below, a conqueror sitting amidst ashes and ruin, waiting for a messenger who never arrives, for terms that will never be offered, for a surrender that will never come. The silence of the deserted city is more deafening than any cannonade. You have taken the physical shell of the enemy's capital, occupied its most symbolic structure, but gained nothing. The scale of the destruction is almost unbelievable. Estimates suggest 75% of Moscow is consumed by the flames, a city sacrificed by its own people, or perhaps caught in the chaotic retreat to deny you shelter, resources, and triumph. This wasn't a surrender. It was an exorcism. He had believed that seizing the vital organ would shock the system into submission. But Russia, in its vastness and its willingness to endure unfathomable pain, proves impervious to conventional logic. You sit in the Kremlin, a spider in the center of a web of ashes, strategically stranded, isolated not by enemy battalions, but by distance, by the relentless turning of the seasons, and by the unbreakable will of a nation that refuses to play by your rules. This long, agonizing wait for a peace treaty that exists only in your mind is the silent turning of the tide. Here is the chilling, undeniable truth. Taking the enemy's capital does not guarantee victory if their will to resist remains unbroken. Your belief that seizing the symbolic center, the heart of Russia, would force submission proves utterly false in the face of a people willing to sacrifice their holiest city. The principle crystallizes in the smoke and ruin. Control of territory is not the same as control of outcomes. Victory isn't truly won until the enemy believes they are defeated and acts accordingly. He conquered stone and wood. He failed to conquer the spirit. The takeaway, etched in the soot and the cold, is brutal. Focusing solely on physical objectives, on geography and occupation, while ignoring the psychological and political will of the opponent, leads to hollow triumphs like this, victories that pave the way for ultimate failure. Sometimes, the hardest thing to conquer is not an army or a city, but an enemy's sheer, stubborn will. Ask yourself, looking at the smoke rise from Moscow, was this the necessary, albeit brutal, cost of war? Or was it the moment hubris collided with an immovable force, revealing the fatal flaw in a plan that measured success only in miles gained and cities occupied? What would you have done sitting alone in the Kremlin, staring at the ashes of your expected triumph? The order cracks like a whip in the freezing air. Retreat. You turn your back on Moscow, a burning husk in the distance, as October bleeds into November. The strategic failure of the long campaign, the Tsar's stubborn refusal to yield, now melts away, revealing the horrific core of this gamble. What began as a grand march of conquest transforms overnight into a desperate, agonizing crawl back from oblivion. You feel the cold seep into your bones, matching the chill settling over the fate of the Grande Armée. This is where the historical analysis ceases to be about maps and troop movements and becomes a raw, visceral testament to human suffering. The endless road back through the Russian winter is not just a path, but a gauntlet of ice, wind, and despair. It is the scene you started with, the one that haunts the annals of military history, a winding river of broken men staggering eastward. Cossack raiders dart from the flanks like wolves, harrying the struggling columns, picking off the weak, the stragglers, the dying. But the enemy without is almost secondary to the enemy within. The gnawing hunger, the frost that bites like acid, the diseases that sweep through the ranks, turning men into shivering specters. Watch as the structure you built, the discipline you forged over years, dissolves like mist in the brutal cold. The proud battalions, the elite guardsmen, become desperate individuals. Ranks mean nothing when the belly aches and the fingers turn black with frostbite. Men discard their heavy muskets, their symbols of power and duty, for a chance at a lighter step, a few more miles. They steal from comrades, fight over scraps of food, abandon the wounded and the dying to the snow. The Grande Armée, once the terror of Europe, is no more. It is a fleeing, disintegrating mob, leaving a trail of corpses stretching hundreds of miles across the white landscape. The nadir arrives at the Berezina River. It is a frozen barrier, a choke point, where the retreating torrent of humanity is cornered. You order engineers to build makeshift bridges under relentless enemy fire, a desperate improvisation against impossible odds. The scene is pure, unadulterated horror. Men, women, camp followers, horses, cannons, all surging towards the narrow wooden spans. The bridges buckle, collapse, the ice cracks. Thousands plunge into the frigid water, screaming, drowning, crushed in the panic. You watch from the bank, a helpless witness to the carnage wrought by the collapse of your grand strategy. Survival is the only currency bought at any price, often at the cost of another life. It is here, amidst this unimaginable human cost, that you make a stark, brutal decision. With remnants of your army trapped or dying, you leave them. Not out of cowardice, you tell yourself, but necessity. You must race back to Paris, to shore up your power, to raise a new army before Europe can fully capitalize on your ruin. It is a strategically sound, perhaps even essential, maneuver for the survival of your empire. Yet, to the men freezing and starving on that road, fighting for their last breath, it is the ultimate abandonment. The emperor, the one who led them into this hell, is gone. The irony is bitter. You leave the broken body of the army to save the political body of your state, but in doing so, you sever the last psychological tie with the men who bled and died for your ambition. This horrific retreat is more than a military defeat. It is a profound, agonizing lesson in the true cost of leadership miscalculation. Look at the frozen faces, the discarded weapons, the piles of bodies. This is the price paid for the belief in one's own infallibility, for the inability to recognize and accept strategic limits. Your ego, your detachment from the brutal realities of the battlefield, did not just cost you a campaign. It caused unimaginable human misery on a vast scale. The principle is laid bare in the snow. The consequences of a leader's strategic error are paid ultimately and entirely in the suffering and death of those they command. The greatest test of leadership is not merely the brilliance of victory, but the capacity to limit the damage, to mitigate the human catastrophe when the grand plan inevitably collapses. What does this endless, frozen road tell you about the weight of the crown you wear? Ask yourself, was the throne worth this agony? Was the ambition worth this human price? From the ashes of Russia, you return, not broken, but defiant. With sheer force of will, you conjure new armies from the very soil of France, fueling their fervor with echoes of past glory. You plunge back into the crucible of conflict, fighting campaigns in 1813 and 1814 that are textbook examples of tactical brilliance. Yet the tide has turned irrevocably. Europe, sensing the first true crack in your armor, unites against you. You are outnumbered, your resources stretched thin, the treasury depleted, and that crucial aura of invincibility, the psychological weapon that often won battles before a shot was fired, is shattered. You can fight brilliantly, but you cannot fight fate, not when it comes with millions of bayonets. The pressure is immense, suffocating. Paris falls. You are forced to abdicate, exiled to the comparatively comfortable cage of Elba. But the restless energy, the fire that forged an empire, cannot be contained. You stage a dramatic return, the flight of the eagle, reclaiming your throne without firing a shot, demonstrating a magnetic pull that still holds France in its sway. It is a final, audacious gamble. It leads, inevitably, to the muddy fields near a village called Waterloo, where, against a combined force, under driving rain and shifting fortunes, your final, decisive defeat unfolds. The arc is complete. From the hungry Corsican striver, scratching for recognition, to the absolute emperor, commanding continents, to the fallen icon, exiled to the remote, lonely rock of St. Helena. There, under the watchful eyes of your captors, you become a prisoner not just of the British Navy, but of history itself, and of the monumental legend you created. You will die there, slowly, contemplating the staggering trajectory of your life. The true turning point wasn't a single battle lost, but the insidious process by which unchecked ambition, relentlessly fueled by absolute power and continuous, almost miraculous success, led to a fatal detachment from reality. You began to believe your will alone could command the world, bending geography, climate, and the resolve of nations to your whim. But the world, in the end, proved indifferent to your commands. The timeless, chilling lesson etched into this final chapter is about the blinding nature of power. It doesn't just grant authority, it warps perception. It magnifies the ego, silences dissenting voices until they become inaudible whispers, and creates an echo chamber where the leader hears only the flattering confirmation of their own unparalleled brilliance. The very ambition that propelled you to such dizzying heights becomes, paradoxically, the force that drives you over the precipice when it is no longer tempered by brutal realism, honest counsel, or necessary humility. Ask yourself, when power becomes absolute, does the leader truly see the world, or merely the reflection of their own desires? What would you have done when everyone says yes and the whispers of doubt fade? The cold winds of the Berezina, the desolate fields of Waterloo, the crushing boredom of St. Helena, they serve as permanent reminders that the grandest visions, when pursued without regard for reality, consequence, or human cost, can collapse into the most profound and desolate failures. As Napoleon himself reflected on St. Helena, wrestling with his legacy, imagination rules the world. He was profoundly right. His own towering imagination of destiny, of empire, of his own unconquerable will, built his world stone by stone, and ultimately, in its unchecked, self-referential grandeur, it became the force that destroyed it. The greatest battle, the one lost most completely, wasn't against external foes. It was against the illusions he built for himself under the intoxicating, corrosive weight of power. We are left to contemplate not just the battles and the maps redrawn, but the man consumed by his own fire. The final lesson from St. Helena is not about the defeat of an army, but the defeat of a mind that could no longer distinguish between the world it wished to command and the stubborn, indifferent reality it inhabited. That distinction, lost in the haze of absolute power, proved to be the costliest error of all. In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that defeated him, it was believing he couldn't lose.